Passing this state law that saved PG&E never made much sense to some of the people hurt by the company's crimes.
It's completely a farce.
That law makes even less sense to Steve Bradley now, after our latest findings about who helped make it.
I wish I could come up with a better metaphor for the shenanigans that are going on. It's almost like the bank robbers union designing the bank safes.
The law, known as AB 1054, affects what millions of Californians pay each month on their power bills. And it was created in response to a crime, not a bank robbery. It was a mass homicide, the Camp Fire, the one that destroyed the town of Paradise in 2018. PG&E pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of 84 people, including Steve's grandma.
Riggs. Guilty, Your Honor.
PG&E recklessly started that fire.
This is the hook that killed 84 people.
By putting profits over safety. In a word, greed.
They didn't want to spend the money to actually replace these things.
While prosecutors built that case, PG&E filed for bankruptcy in 2019. Not to go out of business, but to protect itself and stay in business. That same month, a new governor took office.
Got to give these folks a chance.
PG&E was already on a second chance. The corporation was on federal probation for crimes tied to the deadly San Bruno gas explosion. Despite PG&E's status as a convicted felon, Newsom accepted its campaign money. So did 8 out of 10 members of the state legislature from both parties. Then, when PG&E declared it couldn't afford to pay for the tens of billions of dollars in wildfire damage it had caused, those elected leaders came to PG&E's rescue.
We all have a burden and responsibility to assume the costs.
Governor Newsom's office hired private attorneys who crafted the bill that would become AB 1054. The law created new safety certificates for utility companies to apply for. The certificate protects PG&E shareholders from having to pay for fire damage.
Makes it harder to hold the utility accountable.
This is going to sound weird, but I feel more helpless now than I did on the day of the fire.
PG&E applied right away and quickly got its first safety certificate. 2 months later, this happened. The October 2019 Kincaid fire.
It's not like the governor signed some magical document that fixed PG&E's infrastructure.
It's gone on like this. Kincaid, Zog, which killed 4 people, and Dixie. Every fire season, state investigators find probable cause PG&E committed more reckless arson. And every year, the state awards PG&E a new safety certificate anyway. It's fair to ask, who crafted the law that keeps enabling that to happen? During the hearings on AB 1054, some lawmakers did ask, by name, about the private attorneys the governor's office hired to write it.
It's my understanding that the governor's office, largely through the work of attorneys with O'Melveny and Myers and Guggenheim Investors, basically wrote this bill.
Governor Newsom's cabinet secretary sidestepped that question.
The administration, with our advisors, worked closely with the authors and legislative staff in developing the legislation.
But he was right. These early draft versions of AB 1054 were sent by attorneys at that firm, O'Melveny and Myers. Governor Gavin Newsom's office awarded O'Melveny a contract that paid at least $9.6 million of taxpayer money to help him handle PG&E's bankruptcy. Newsom didn't hide that. He talked up O'Melveny's qualifications.
They are experts in energy.
But the governor failed to mention where some of that expertise came from. We found that before it worked for the state, O'Melveny worked for PG&E. PG&E filed these documents 5 months before the Camp Fire. They list O'Melveny as one of PG&E's law firms.
So PG&E's lawyers wrote the law that allowed them to get away with murder.
The list showed O'Melveny working for PG&E as recently as 2017, the year before the Camp Fire. But we found O'Melveny's legal work for PG&E goes back at least 2 decades. O'Melveny represented both PG&E's electric and gas businesses.
I would love for someone from the governor's office to be able to explain all this.
We've been asking,
How can you assure those people, including the fire victims, that your office can act neutrally, considering that PG&E donated more than $208,000 to help you get elected?
I know this is a mantra, and I don't know how many times I've answered this question. I would encourage you to go back to all my previous answers. If the suggestion is somehow I'm influenced by that, you're wrong.
Newsom's office declined our request for an interview. In response to our emails about his hiring of O'Melveny and Myers, the governor's spokesperson wrote, "The firm you're referring to did not represent PG&E when it worked for the state of California on this matter."
It still looks bad. You know, they still have a law firm that previously represented PG&E, now representing the state. They're treating PG&E like another office of the governor.
Assemblymember Chris Holden, the sponsor of AB 1054, booked an interview with us. Then his office canceled with no explanation. They ignored our request to reschedule, so we found him at the Capitol.
Were you aware that O'Melveny and Myers had PG&E as a client the year before the campfire?
No, not to my recollection.
I've talked to the family members of some of the people who died up in Paradise. Say this doesn't pass the smell test. To them, this is PG&E's lawyers writing the bill that saved PG&E's business.
Well, I don't agree with that. I mean, I can't disagree with their feelings and how they view it, and they have every right to view it in the way that they are.
Yeah.
But this was not something that PG&E designed.
A spokesperson for O'Melveny told us it didn't have an obligation to disclose its past work for PG&E before representing the governor in PG&E's bankruptcy. The firm wouldn't say whether it did disclose that information. The governor's office and PG&E wouldn't tell us whether that was discussed either.
I think they knew exactly what they were doing.
Former prosecutor Mike Aguirre represents PG&E customers suing against AB 1054. He obtained these calendar entries from the governor's office, meetings back when the safety certificate law was being written behind closed doors.
The governor was holding a series of secret meetings, some of which included O'Melveny and Myers, with PG&E to do what PG&E was asking them to do, which is to relieve PG&E from any legal responsibility for past and future fires.
Newsom's spokesperson told us the lawyers involved had nothing to do with any prior representation of PG&E. PG&E wouldn't give us a list, though, of the specific O'Melveny attorneys who represented them. PG&E spokesperson Lindsay Pallo would only say there was no conflict of interest, or even the appearance of a conflict of interest.
It appears like there is to me.
Aguirre sees the conflict this way. Imagine the state had come down harshly on PG&E. You can bet the company would have complained that its own lawyers were involved.
You don't hire a pro-corporate law firm when you need a pro-victim solution. That's really what it boils down to.
It has to be corruption. But if they were bumbling politicians that didn't understand what they were fully doing, they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing.
We think it's important to hold these utilities accountable.
Then why are they getting safety certificates every year?
Well, I mean, I can't explain. I'm not part of doing the investigations and issuing the certificates.
There's a tree on the line, started a fire.
When last year's massive Dixie fire sparked along a PG&E power line, the company had a safety certificate that O'Melveny and Myers helped create. A certificate that lets PG&E cover the wildfire damage out of a fund you pay into on your power bill.
PG&E is planning to take $150 million out of that wildfire fund for the Dixie fire. If there was wrongdoing, should they get it? No.